want to let you talk about a little bit about the tours here, and then you can go on with your Bible.
So we do tours here on Saturdays at noon. They're walk-in tours, so you can come in at any time, and we'll give you basically a full tour. We also do appointment tours during the week, so those are group tours that we do. So we want to welcome you to come to one of those as well. So we'll take you through each of the departments, like she said, the museum gallery, the mural that's on the wall as you come up. Also downstairs in the archives, you'll see photos and things, so we'll tell you some about those photos, and also our museum gallery. So, but as far as today, we have Professor Manu Ampim. He's a historian and a primary researcher specializing in African and African American history and culture. He has a BS degree in business management and a master's in history, African American studies. He's written a pioneering book on Black community development and the influence of the current Afrocentric movement. So I'm going to let Minister Thurston come up, and she is going to introduce him.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you all for coming. It's a wonderful day to be inside and expand our minds, expand our beings. So thank you for coming. I just want to really quickly tell you a little bit more about Professor Manu Ampim. He is currently a professor at Contra Costa College. He teaches Africana studies as well as history. He is the department chair for HAG, which is History, Anthropology, and Geography. Professor Ampim has been conducting tours all over, I tend to say the world because that's easier, but primarily throughout Africa, Europe, parts thereabout, Kemet, for over 30 years, so we're talking over 3 decades. He is a primary researcher, and in that, I had to learn that what that means basically is he's not telling you what somebody else already told you. And if he is, it's because he went and did the work himself to verify it, to touch it, to understand it, to come to a deeper knowledge of what it is that he's bringing back to you. So that's one huge difference in listening to someone, to know that they actually did firsthand research themselves, and that that's what you're getting. So it's kind of like the next best thing to being here. I just want to give you that little bit and say that you are in for a treat. I don't know if you're here intentionally or unintentionally. I kind of went and rounded some of you up, so for those of you who was unintentional here, you're in for a great treat. So without further ado, Professor Ampim.
How's everybody doing? Okay, great, excellent. I want to thank the African American the Museum and Library of Oakland and Ms. Beta and Mr. Marco and Mr. Bellandelli, the Demerson, who actually brought up this opportunity, and to really share some of my primary or first-hand research. I've traveled around the world to a couple dozen countries to do primary research, and my latest book is a history of African civilizations, and it's just a small part of what I teach at Contra Costa College, and it's a small part of what I know. I'm glad that the book is here at the library, and we're getting the book out so that people can learn from my original research if they're in the community or at the middle school level, high school level, and many of my colleagues actually use it in their classrooms at the college level as well. So I just want to share with you just a little bit of the work over the last 30 plus years. And afterwards, if you'd like to grab a copy, we have copies today. So History of African Civilizations, I want to just introduce it to you. And that's the book, but I teach a unique class at Contra Costa College. So there's 115 community colleges in the state, and there's only 2 in the entire state of California that have a required class on Africa at Contra Costa College, where I'm at, and City College of San Diego. That's it, out of 115. Then if you look at the UCs, there's barely any mention of Africa. The CSUs, barely any mention of Africa. And if they do, it's usually to touch on African culture and then to leap all the way to the period of slavery and colonialism in the modern period. That's typically how it's treated. But in my book, no. The entire course is on Africa at the apex of human achievement. The course does not deal with when Africa was derailed. We don't deal with slavery, colonialism, the slave trade, and the diaspora. No, we deal with Africans when they were the masters of their own fate. So we go back into antiquity, not on guesswork or opinion, but on systematic primary or first-hand research in museums throughout the U.S., Canada. I lived in Europe for a year to go to all the collections in Europe that have stolen African artifacts. I've done extensive field work in Africa at pyramid sites, temple sites, tomb sites, and ancient residential sites. In the last dozen years or so, I've also been spending a lot of time in the living communities, these remote areas that still practice traditional lifeways, where I meet with chiefs and elders and a group of people that they call heroes to observe their cultural lifeways that are still in extent today. So anyway, that's part of what's in the book. First thing I should mention is that I've been on a campaign for more than 30 years, and that is a campaign against the spread of ignorance. And we need you to join us in that, because we know about computer viruses, and I'm glad that you have your mask on, some of you, so we can stay healthy. And we know about the coronavirus, but very few think about the deadly information viruses, where people spread misinformation on a regular and consistent basis. You know how they get away with it these days? They have new terminology that they use. So when people don't know, you know what they do? They say, well, you know, back in the day, because they don't have any dates or details. So they say back in the day. You know, when I say whose day, what day? Researchers don't think that way. We think more specifically. Well, you know, back in Africa, there's no such thing as back in Africa. We're talking about millions of square miles. So we need to be very specific. So that's why I go to the field to really smash a lot of the misinformation that is not only from the old colonial writers, but because of the information age today, people intentionally and unintentionally hit the forward button and misinform people in their network. So the goal is really to counter that with first-hand original information and give you insight. So I want to speak about some of the field work that I've been doing most recently on the oldest of the classical African civilizations, and the oldest of them is Kush. And there are earlier African pioneers, early African authors that wrote about Kush, but they used it by the foreign name, the name that the Greeks, the foreigners called it. They didn't call it Kush, they called it Ethiopia. But there are some early forerunners that we have to give respect to, and I'm sure some of these volumes are right here at the library. But the Wonderful Ethiopians of the Ancient Kushite Empire, written by Drusilla Dunjee Houston in the 1920s. John Jackson wrote an influential pamphlet, Ethiopia and the Origin of Civilization. They weren't alone. Also, the great William Leo Hansberry, he didn't write books, but he did field research. So from his field work and his notes, the students of Professor Hansberry compiled his material and wrote the William Leo Hansberry African History Notebook, volumes 1 and 2. And Hansberry, by the way, is a pioneer because in 1922, he founded the African Civilization section of the history department at Howard University, within the history department. And Hansberry was such a pioneer that at this historically black college, he was ridiculed. There were people on the campus of Howard University that condemned Hansberry, said he was teaching a non-academic subject. This is how foreign it was for people to even think about Africa, let alone put it in an academic curriculum. But Hansberry did that in 1922, and he was condemned by his colleagues on the esteemed campus of Howard University. Today, if you don't know it, some of them say, they say that Howard is the, as they call it, the Mecca of black institutions. I went to Morgan State University down the road, so we don't really see it that way at all. We have a different opinion about that. But at this mecca of black institutions, they ridiculed Hansberry. He never got credit from Howard. He got credit from his students. So 50 years after he founded the African Civilization section, he was celebrated in 1972. And Howard kind of joined in, but they don't really get credit for embracing Hansberry. It was the students who did that. So I do have to give some respect to those early pioneers who focused on ancient Kush, or what the Greeks later called Ethiopia. By the way, the word Ethiopia or Ethiops is a Greek term. The Greeks were struck by color. Ethiops means burnt skin, black skin, or kissed by the sun. Or it means a man with sunburnt skin. That's literally what Ethiops refers to. So if somebody says that people were not concerned about color in the past, of course they were. It's just that it's changed in modern times, but you can tell by some of the names, like Ethiopia, that they certainly were talking exclusively about skin color. And this is the man here that you see who has had the greatest impact on my primary or first-hand research throughout Africa. This was a student of Hansberry, Dr. Chancellor Williams. And the reason why is because in the 1950s, Dr. Chancellor Williams, he went to 26 countries in Africa and did research among 105 different language groups. He was a researcher's researcher. So when I read his seminal work, The Destruction of Black Civilization, I was inspired by that because he had laid out a roadmap of what scholars should focus on. So he said that he only scratched the surface in this monumental book where he talked about ancient Kush, ancient Nubia, ancient Egypt, or the real name is ancient Kemet, and he talked about the work of future historians. So when I read Chancellor Williams' work in the 1980s, I took it personal. So when he said that what's going to be explored should be done by future historians, in the pages in the book that follows in the upcoming chapters, when he said future historians, I translated it to mean Manu Ampim is going to explore those future pages and do the work. So I took it personally, and I began to learn the craft of primary research. So that kind of led me to deal with ancient Kush. It's the oldest of the classical African civilizations. And notice that we say classical. We could say ancient African civilizations, but classical is more appropriate. So what does classical mean, by the way? We hear about classical what? Classical dance, classical theater, classical music, classical art. Am I correct? So what does classical mean? So why would I put so much emphasis on classical and not just call these ancient African civilizations? It goes back to the meaning of classical. Anybody like to give some input on what classical means? We hear it all the time. Classical meaning what?
Standard.
Standard, absolutely. The model, the guide, the paradigm, the standard by which everything else is judged. And it's a prototype. So that's why we call these classical African civilizations, because of their enduring influence. And by the way, you can look at the classics departments at UC Berkeley, Stanford, UCLA, Oxford, Cambridge, you name it. I lived there in England for a while, and I don't have the same opinion as some people who elevate Oxford to a very high level. I didn't see that at all. But they have these classics departments, and they leave out, I'm saying they because this is universal, they leave out every other culture in the world. They focus on only Greek and Roman culture in the classics department. So students are not getting a well-rounded and in-depth understanding of classical civilizations. They're learning about the classical civilizations of Europe. Wait a minute, but there's classical civilizations among the Mayan. There's classical Mayan civilization. There's classical East Indian civilization. There's classical Chinese civilization. There's classical Islamic civilization. There's certainly classical African civilization, but they're left out of the curriculum. Unless they have a class to say, look, why don't we have a class on Egypt or some other place so that we can find out what Homer's referring to or what Herodotus is referring to. So in the classics department, they don't see other cultures for their intrinsic value. They just want to make sure they can understand the reference of the Roman or Greek writer. And so the programs are based simply on European culture. That's not accurate. It's not correct. It's not something that can be defended. Why not introduce and talk about all of the classical African civilizations or classical civilizations around the world? So this is why we say classical, because this is not exclusive to Europe. It never has been. Here we're talking about African contributions at the apex of human achievement, and they're left out of the curriculum. And students get their degrees thinking that they know. They don't know. They don't even have a clue. So let me show you some of that as we move forward. I coined the term Kushology. I showed you some of the earlier pioneers, but they were using the Greek word Ethiopia, even though they were researching on the oldest of these great African civilizations, which is Kush. So my work over the years, I've defined and coined the field as Kushology. I started dealing with Egypt. You know that as Egyptology. But we call it by the original name of Kemet. So really, we focus on Kemetology. Why use foreign names when we know the original? But you know about Egyptology, then there's a newer field called Nubiology. This is in Northeast Africa. And so you have to go a little bit further south dealing with Nubiology, but guess what? Then if you continue to go south, you're dealing with Kushology, the first of these classical African civilizations. So I coined this term. And here's the area, after I've done the work throughout Europe and North America at museums, institutes, and libraries, then it was time for me to do field work. So this area that you see here in the Northeast African region, this is where I've been concentrating my field work over the years now. This is a vast area to learn about ancient and modern Kush. So this is what I'm doing when I'm not writing and doing other work. I'm in the field. So you see all the different countries from Sudan, South Sudan, Egypt. I started in the north and I started to go up south. Yes, up south, because as you go south, this is where the hills and the mountains are. So it's up south and down north. It's a different orientation. So I continue to go up south to learn more and more about not just Egypt or Kemet, not just Nubia, but the area of Kush. So this map we developed some years ago about what Kush would have looked like maybe about 6,000 or so years ago. And this is the vast area of Kush, ancient Kush. This is the inset. You see the large area. And the heartland of Kush was in current-day Sudan. That's where they built the mighty monuments, the mighty pyramids. There's twice as many pyramids in Sudan as there is in Egypt, built by Kushites, the mighty builders, and they were building for eternity. So you have hundreds of pyramids in this area, elaborate tombs, colossal statues made out of granite because they were in fact building for eternity. But this was the heartland of ancient Kush, but it included Egypt, South Sudan, which is the newest country in the world, Ethiopia, in fact you see the large area, Somalia, Djibouti, Eritrea, and across the Red Sea in Saudi Arabia and Yemen. So this is the area of ancient Kush. And so let me just share with you how it is, or why it is we don't know a lot about Kush. We don't hear a lot about Kush. I remember a while back, I was speaking to a group and I said, I'm going to talk about Kush today. And one of the young guys was excited. He said, yay, we're going to talk about Kush. I said, young fella, it's not that kind of Kush to what you're thinking about. He thought about marijuana, Kush. And I said, no. So I said, let me clarify. We're not just talking about Kush, we're talking about ancient Kush, the civilization, young fella. So take notes and learn. So now look, here's what happens, just to give you an idea. And as I look around, I know you all have been around a while, just to give you an idea of how so-called experts don't know much of anything about Kush. So let me give you an example of how the Kushites are mislabeled as Nubians. Nubians are a great ancient civilization. They're still around today, but older than Nubia is Kush. So let me share with you this. Now this is in, let me go back slightly. So this is some images from the Louvre Museum in Paris. Now in the Louvre, you have some of the greatest and most influential scholars and curators that you can ever meet. And they have a lot of artifacts from Egypt and Kush, mainly from Egypt. And they have this scene here. So when I came across this scene, I said, I must document this among other scenes because the great scholars at the Louvre don't know basic information. So let me share with you. This is a little bit washed out, but I think you can see. Anybody read French? Or can you see this clear enough to read it or
Left to
translate
right,
for us?
Left to right, the chiefs of countries of Libya, Nubia, Syria, Palestine.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, now it says, so yeah, you're right. It just says from right to left. Yes, so from right to left, you're right. Chiefs, kings of the countries of Libya, Nubia, Syria, Palestine. Totally correct. Now take a look. So they're referring to these men. So these are multiple men here, and they're from what country? Libya.
Libya.
And these three? They're supposedly from Nubia? Yeah, Nubia, and then these couple? Okay, the Palestine area. Okay, there's a problem with this. The great scholars at the Louvre are mistaken. They say that the men in the middle are Nubian. Not really. It's pretty easy to tell that they're not Nubian. So if you take a close look here, if you look at the men here, look at the man who's like second from the right. Do you notice anything about his forehead by chance? Anything you notice? You see the horizontal marking there? Now, instead of scarification, that's a foreign term, foreign idea. We call it cultural markings. So take a look at the cultural markings across the forehead. You see one line, 2, 3, 4. And so you see these markings across the forehead, and look at the hairstyle. This has nothing to do with Nubia. The Nubians do not use this kind of cultural markings. You know where you find this at? Without a doubt, without debate, from South Sudan. And the folks in the Louvre, they're putting this out for millions of visitors, and they don't know. This is how unknown it is when people are looking at evidence from ancient Kush. So you see the cultural markings. But these are not Nubians. Nubians, by the way, Nubia is in northern Sudan and southern Egypt. That's where Nubia was in antiquity, and that's where Nubia is today. But as you go further south, then it is the land of Kush. And there's Kushites. People still around speak the Cushitic language even now. Let me share with you about those cultural markings. Now that was at the Louvre in Paris. Let me show you, this is from a tomb of Horemheb in Egypt. And let me show you the great official Horemheb. Now this is about it's more than 3,300 years ago. More than 3,300 years ago, this is Horemheb in his tomb. And he's the tall person because he's the subject. But what's happening here is we have a couple of men adorning him with with gold collars. This is like a lifetime achievement award. And he was obviously a man of tremendous rank because he doesn't just have one collar, gold collar, but a number of them. And so he was a man of high rank and high achievement. That's what you're seeing there as he receives these gold collars. But Horemheb, he indicates different groups of people. It's a little bit washed out, but I think you'll be able to see it with the next slide. But he's showing a group of men. You see the row of men at the top, the middle, and then there's also a row at the bottom here. But if you look more closely, take a look at these row of men, this series of men. And they have the cultural hairstyle from South Sudan. And notice the hoop earrings for some of them. These are men. And you see some of the original paint surviving. But the most important thing, look at the cultural markings across the forehead. It is obvious. So if you can count with me, that's 1, that's 2, 3, 4, what was it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You got 7. And notice that they're red. Why would these be red? And then you notice that here, you can see the cultural markings, but they're not red. And then notice here again, you got a man, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there's about 6 here. And you see the cultural markings, and they're different colors. You see that? So what does that tell us? Why are the artists making a distinction here? Because what they're doing, for some of the men, they're showing the cuts across the forehead and the stages of healing. It's the stages of healing. That's what's happening here. This has nothing to do with Nubia. So the folks at the Louvre are just making things up. They call everything Nubia because they don't know. It's not that Nubia weren't great in the old days and great today, but it's just a generic word to cover up the fact that they don't know when you go further and further to the south. These are Kushites. And we know that because of the culture markers. We know that because of a lot of the text that gives their name. So that's what's happening here. There's different stages of healing as you look at the culture markings. So here's another close-up, so you can see it even more. See, this is not red because you can see the healing. Everybody agree? It's pretty obvious. These are culture markings, and the artists are very clever to show different stages of the cuts across the forehead to link them to their group. This is why in the field of Kushology we don't have to guess. The evidence is clear. That's why I say in the realm of serious research, documentation beats conversation every day of the week. We can talk all day, but what about the documentation? So these, by the way, are Nuer from South Sudan. No debate about it. And how do you know? Well, because we've showed you the cultural markings. Take a look at the Nuer from South Sudan. It has nothing to do with Nubia. It's much, much further to the south. You see them culture markers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, at least 6. And these are very distinctive from one group to another. So as I do work in South Sudan, they're very particular. In the area of Wow or Euro or Rumbek, when they do the culture markings, it's very distinctive. So you have to figure out, well, how far do the markings go towards the ear? Is there a dip in the middle? And that's what distinguishes one area or one region from the next, but clearly South Sudan and not in the area of Nubia. So that's why Kushology is very important to correct things. This is the greatest builder in the history of Kush right here, Taharqa. That's why I put Taharqa on the front cover of the book. You can never go wrong with presenting the image of the great builder himself. Everywhere we look in the Nile Valley, you see the DNA, the fingerprints of Taharqa, building large pyramids and statues and columns. One of the great builders is the DNA of Taharqa up and down the Nile Valley. He's the greatest single builder in the history of ancient Kush. Massive statues made out of granite, the mighty Kushite builders. Take a look. This is me in front of a huge statue. You don't normally see these. But this is south of Egypt, and they were building at a prolific level. So why not capture this in the book? We had to. You start with Kush. You see these images. Sometimes they're mislabeled. We know they're Kushites because the writing tells us that. Look at the high quality. As you can see, these men, the white linen. Notice the jewelry around their kind of the bracelets. I don't know if you can see at the bottom. You may not, some of you, but the beautiful white sandals. Notice the broad collars, and then you have rings of gold. Anytime you see 3, it means plural. It means gold and a whole lot more gold. And matter of fact, there's a gold rush in Sudan. Before the civil war broke out in Sudan, gold rush. You'll be out in the desert area, we're driving in remote areas, and we see these lights, it looks like a town. And the next thing you know, you get closer, it's not a town. It's a major commercial mining operation to extract gold. Now people are still in the gold. The Wagner Group from Russia is still in gold. The United Arab Emirates still in gold now. So it's a big time problem, but the area is rich with gold today as it was in antiquity. How do we know these are Kushite princes? How do we identify them as princes? Well, I'm glad you asked. Let me answer your question. It's because, take a look. You see the crowns? Did you notice the crowns on their head? Well, why aren't they kings or something like that? Why princes? Well, look at the man furthest to the right. Notice the side lock of hair. When you see a side lock of hair, that means youth. That means that they're young. They're not totally of age or of the highest rank. So anyway, these are princes. And when you see the color black, that's not an exaggeration. The people literally have that skin color. Not, dark skin or chocolate, but black. Amazing black, wild black, stunning black, blue black, on the other side of black. It's amazing. But anyway, beautiful color. But anyway, these are princes. The Kushites were great builders. One of the things that we learn about the Kushite culture that still exists today, this is King Asfelta, the great Kushite builder. This is the origin of the modern tombstone. And this here is really, this is his coronation stela. Or in other words, this is the stela that gives the autobiographical text of Asfelta, where he's describing his accomplishments in life, but he also is showing a scene when he receives his crown from the god and goddess. He's kneeling, He's receiving his crown of rulership, and guess who's presiding over the ceremony? Mom, the mama. She's in charge. Every ceremony of the king is only legitimate if the mother is presiding over the ceremony. And they all had to send for mom to be in charge. Not the father, but the mother. The women were in charge of the throne. They passed the throne from mother to daughter. Well, why did he marry his sister? That's a political marriage, that's why. Well, why did he have a second wife? Glad you asked. You all have actually very good questions. He had a second wife for conjugal purposes, to reproduce. First wife, that's his sister, because she's the one that represents control of the throne. It's a political marriage. If you don't marry your sister, you cannot become king. If mom's not in charge, you cannot become king. Anyway, his mother, Nasalsa, has to come and preside over the ceremony that you see. It's a tremendous tradition. They're pyramid builders. I'll just skip through this because I like to hear any comments, questions that you all have. But there's minimally 223 pyramids in Sudan, twice as much as Egypt. Some think there may be more that have been found in recent years. I think some of those claims are highly questionable, but nevertheless, you have pyramid fields like you see here in the area of Nuri. You have Nuri, and that's one of the many pyramid fields. And the sacred area of Jebel Barkel. These, and people like to say, well, the Kushites, they copied. No, they didn't copy anything. These are unique designs. They're much thinner in their design, and also you see on the side is kind of a different. The way they square the corners very, very different than what we see. So lots of pyramid fields, hundreds of them, and so let me share with you. It's not only in South Sudan and Sudan, but I spent a lot of time learning about ancient Kush and the groups that represent ancient Kush in Ethiopia. Now keep something in mind, the Ethiopians that we see today, they're from the north, from Addis Ababa, the capital, and they're in this area, Tigray. So they speak Amharic or Tigrinya, but guess where I spend time? Not only in the north, but in the southern area. This stands for Southern Nations, Nationalities, and Peoples Region. It's a special region. There's over 40 different groups that still live their traditional ways. So they have practices that go back to ancient antiquity, like the leopard skin. I'm fascinated by that how is it that you have these leopard skin ceremonies that still continue today? So literally, you see the images of Kushites. Notice all the gold, and notice the hairstyle. This is not a wig, this is hairstyle. Well, why is it they can have dark skin color like this and kind of yellow or red hair? Another good question you ask. It's because they use cow urine. And over a 6-day period, the cow urine turns the hair. And they do that today. So it's either the Nuer, the Dinka, and the Mandari. They do that today. So when I show the elders and the chiefs and others this, they give great details, even though they've never seen these images before, but they know these kind of practices. So you have the ostrich feather, but you notice this here, the leopard skin outfit, only worn by the most important people in the society, literally a leopard skin. So don't be alarmed. People say, oh my God, they're out killing animals. No, not that easy. The leopard is very clever. It's very difficult to track a leopard. You have to have a hunting party, and if you're lucky, over a week you can track one. And to kill a leopard, somebody's always considered a hero because it's so much of a rare fate. So it's not like they're going out and killing animals. It's not. So anybody that can accomplish such a feat, they are considered to be a hero. Someone who protects and promotes the culture. So in Amharic, they call it Jedna for men, and for women, Jednit. Special title. So I interviewed them, talked to them, and anyway, you have the leopard skin in antiquity. These are thousands of years old, this image here. Even in the tomb of King Tutankhamun, that was Kush, but even in Egypt, you see the leopard skin here, literally. A leopard skin outfit for a ritual and ceremony for King Tut after he passed away. This is over 3,300 years ago. You see it there. It's in Kemet, in Kush. But it also continues in modern day. So when I'm out in the field, I meet with chiefs. This is a DC chief. This is in southern Ethiopia. And this man here, he cannot be touched. Nobody can go into his compound behind. So when I was asking questions about the leopard skin outfit, what rituals, what ceremonies is being used for, why? Why the leopard? If you're not deep, they'll give you a surface answer. Well, we use the leopard for the special ceremony because we like the spots. Okay, yeah, but why not the cheetah then? Oh, okay. Because the cheetah also has spots. So then they give the characteristics of the leopard. And it's amazing how they know that. This is almost, even though it's not the case, it's almost like they have them in a small area making scientific observations because of what they know. And they say the leopard is clever. They give so many details about the leopard and specialness of it. So when I'm asking questions, the chief, I didn't know what he was doing. He gets up and goes to his compound and actually got the leopard skin outfit that he wears in the most important rituals. And here he is, and check it out, you see the teeth? Yeah, it's always special. And then, lots of ceremonies, of course. Anyway, I'll just skip through this, but you see the men here, leopard skin, and then the women, they have like the most important, have the ostrich feather. So anyway, I won't go into the details, but just to share with you that when cultures continue to practice their cultural life ways, it's special for me as a researcher because I can understand the past by observing the present. They can't even explain anything from the past in great detail in most cases, but they certainly can explain what they're doing today and why. And as a researcher, that allows us to match and merge and make an assessment of the present ceremonies to help give some clarity to the past. These men, this is not their hair, this is an ostrich feathers and ostrich plumes, and wearing the leopard skin outfit. And here are the men, and the women are wearing the colobus monkey, but this is very important. Again, it is very difficult to catch and capture a leopard, very difficult. So it's not like they're going around killing leopards. No one is that great to be able to do it. So that's why this is not them going out and just killing animals. Anyway, I speak with chiefs to find out about the hero status. Why the ostrich feather? Why the leopard skin outfit? Here's another chief, the Kara chief. And you see these brothers in the background? They're not using paint for the photo. That's what they do every day. How about that? How about staying in a Kara community and learning? That's why I know about Kushology, because of the field work, because doing the primary research gives us an inside point of view. Now this man here, Elder Abraham, he's a Dinka. This is what I was showing you was southern Ethiopia. Now further south is South Sudan. And Elder Abraham, he knows my work, he knows my mission, and when I'm there, and as a matter of fact, it's interesting, he just told one of his sons, he just picked a wife for one of his sons, and so his son is trying to gather money because he has to pay dowry. He has to pay a certain number of cows. And they still practice the tradition today. His son is about 37 years old, but guess what? He has to follow dad. Dad picked a wife, he has no choice. Following Dinka tradition. Anyway, Elder Abraham did something special. He organized 11 Dinka chiefs. These are all chiefs of the Dinka in different areas. And the 5 on the left, these are regional chiefs or paramount chiefs. So I had an opportunity to talk with them in great detail. Now, I don't know if all of you know this, but sometimes people make a joke in the black community about people always being late. The colored people's time and all that. Guess what? We had a meeting scheduled for 4 o'clock to meet with this august gathering of chiefs. No one had ever seen 11 chiefs gathered like this. So Elder Abraham's son calls me and said, "Are you ready, Professor?" I said, "Yeah, but it's not till 4. This was just after 1. He said, "I'm going to come pick you up now." I said, "I think you need to check with your father. I think you might have the times off." Checked with his father and said that all the chiefs are already there and ready. So I got there at it was like an hour and a half earlier, and I was quote unquote late. They were so excited. Yes, sir.
Are the 5 on the left military?
Not exactly, but it's just kind of it's part of their their regional attire. I think there might be a military component, but they're not in the military. Yes, and these, as a matter of fact, there's a lot of people there. There were research students from the University of Juba, which is the capital of South Sudan. No one had ever seen this many chiefs in one location, and it just so happened that they were in Juba, in the capital. So I learned a lot, and you know, when I interviewed them, when they all stood up at first, and they sang 2 songs. I had no idea what the songs were about. And when I got the translation, they said that the chief stood up and they sang 2 songs in order to say, we accept your questions. So, okay, appreciate that. And now, I'm not showing you this, but after this, the other researchers and others who saw such a great gathering, they were in the photo, and they wanted me in the photo. I said, okay, no problem. I can just join the semicircle or stand in the back of the chiefs. Guess what their idea was? I didn't agree with it. I didn't think it was photographically the best thing to do. There's a picture of me right in the middle. I'm sitting in front of of these chiefs. And so I said, yeah, okay, well, I said, no, why don't we change it around? I'm trying to direct it. They said, nope, you need to be right front and center because we respect your work to help maintain our cultural lifeways. They were explaining the details of these images from ancient Kush and had never seen them before because that's their culture. They don't. And by the way, the Dinka and the Nuer, they're cousins. Yeah, they're closely linked. They're explaining the ostrich feather because they know. They're explaining their hairstyle because they know. They're explaining the cow skins that you see here because they know. Anything. Anyway, so I just wanted to share with you, that's my work in Kushology, ancient Nubia. We can say a lot about that, but I'll say that there's a section on ancient Nubia in the book. Kush came first, and then Nubia, and then you have ancient Kemet. That's the original name. The Greeks changed it to Egypt. Kemet means the black land or the land of black people. They're not talking about the black ground or soil. They're talking about the people. So this is the greatest statue on earth. So I have a lot of this, in the book, just so people can understand that the greatest and most well-known and most famous statue on earth is right here. Heru Im Akhet, or the so-called Great Sphinx. And here it is. There's different images. This is 66 feet long. Here's a man here in the box, believe it or not. And 66 feet long, 66 feet high, 240 feet long of one single block of limestone. The greatest statue on earth. It's in Giza, in the northern part of Egypt. And one thing you don't normally see is the profile view. If you take a look at the profile view, this is unmistakably African. Look at the prognatism. Even though the nose has been chiseled off, some people think Napoleon blew it off. It wasn't Napoleon. It was long before him. The nose and beard were taken off, but you can see the profile Africoid view. If that doesn't help you, take a look at the close-up. You don't normally see the profile, but this is the greatest statue on earth. Take a look. This is the other side. Look, notice some of the original brownish paint. Original, they're still there. Let me give you a close-up. This is some of the original paint after thousands of years. You don't normally see that, but it's important to point that out because we're looking at the greatest statue on earth. And anyway, I can say quite a lot, but I cover a lot of this in the book, The Pyramids, which are built for eternity. It's a proverb, by the way, that all the world fears time, but time itself fears the pyramids, because these are mighty monuments that were built to endure time. And these boxes represent people. Can you imagine? They were building at a tremendous level. This is equivalent to a 48-story skyscraper. This is the largest one built for Khufu. Not built by slaves, not built by aliens, but built by African stonemasons, African managers, African blue-collar workers, astrologers, astronomers. And they were building and moving hundreds of thousands of tons of masonry. Each stone weighs about 2.5 tons. Can you imagine the heavy transport techniques involved? This is Khufu, who commissioned the building of that great pyramid. This is another image of probably Khufu from 4,700 years ago. Here's this is Menkaura's pyramid. This is the third of the largest ones. And I can share with you quite a lot. Look at the masterpieces here. Notice the husband and wife showing affection. Has her right arm around his waist. You see that? Always. You show and see affection. Let me just go through all this. There's a place that's been found, a location of the workman's city. where we now know since 1991, the bakery, the brewery, the tombs have been found at this location not far from the Great Pyramids, and we know from the documents that people were paid for their labor, with grains of wheat, grains of barley, and with linen cloth. They would work 7 days, 3 days off. That would be a week. Work 7 days, 3 days off, that's another week. So there's 3 weeks in a month of 10 days, and people will work, they work, and they were paid. So that's where I'm at here, is this place that clearly, this has been since 1991. Tombs have been found, and this is still being excavated here. Here you have a man, there's 2 seated figures. You have a man here, you see his elbow, his knee, his feet, he's facing to the right, this is his wife. And when you see these images in the tombs, we know their administrative titles. Anyway, this has nothing to do with slavery at all. And people were master builders, master stonemasons, so no slaves had anything to do with it. I'm gonna just skip through these because I can say a lot. By the way, these were not tombs either. They were not tombs. No one was found in any of the pyramids at all. Besides, if you look at the greatest pyramid, the one that I showed you, if you look at ground level, these are the chambers where Egyptologists claim people were buried. They call this the Queen's Chamber. Based on what? Oh, well, it's a little bit smaller than the one above, so must have been for the Queen. No, not at all. Well, why are you calling this the King Chamber? Well, we don't know. It's just a little larger. It's above, so it must have been for the king. Well, first of all, this was not a tomb. It has nothing to do with the King and Queen Chamber. That's just made up, and nobody was found there. No burial, no mummy, no skeleton. Not even the subterranean chamber. In fact, none of the early pyramids were there any burials. This had nothing to do with tombs. By the way, Africans don't build hundreds of feet above ground. They bury people in the ground, and there's no evidence of a burial. So we have to get rid of the alien idea as well, because aliens did not descend from Mars and build pyramids and then ascend back up to Mars. Why bring that up, Professor Manu? Because right now, Netflix and History Channel is still running the Ancient Alien series after all these years. But it has nothing to do with tombs. It's about astrology and astronomy. Look at each side represents a perfect square. You see this? So you have if you look above, you got a triangle here. That's one. Another triangle. Then you have a third one here. And in the back, you have a perfect triangle. Now, we know from math, if you have 4 equilateral triangles, you have a perfect square. So here it is looking at it from above. See that perfect square? This is built at a very extraordinary level. So anyway, I can share quite a lot with you about the purpose, because it's certainly not about tombs, it's about ascension. And I'm not going to cover this in so much. I do have a section on the book on these unique contributions in writing. For example, Ptahotep wrote the first book in the history of the world about 4,400 years ago, 37 lessons on ethical and moral conduct. This is the book of Ptahotep. This is the oldest book in the history of the world right now that survived. This is the handwriting here of Ptahotep. 37 lessons on ethical conduct, moral conduct. How do you respect your elders? How do you avoid conflict? How do you make sure that your name does not bring forth a foul odor? There's nothing worse than a name with a foul odor. Ptahotep is teaching lessons. In some of these books, he's the first of the writers, but they're called the books of wise instructions. They're called the wisdom texts. Long before the Songs of Solomon or books of Proverbs in the Bible, you have the first book, the book of Ptahotep, 37 lessons on ethical and moral conduct, the world's oldest book. And it's about ethics and morality. What about medicine? Well, we can look at that if we had time. And this here, some of you came today for this one reason. You wanted to see the image of the first known dentist in the history of the world. That's him. That's him, Hesse Ray, chief dentist. Now, we have to agree to one thing here. As you look at this original image of Hesse Ray going back 4,800 years ago, or 2800 BCE, we can agree that if you look at his hair and the helical structure of the hair, the afro, let's agree, folks, he just came from the barber. This is a fresh cut. This is a fresh cut of Hesse Ray. So anyway, we can share with you a lot. The first known doctors, Imhotep. So I can go through these contributions, but I won't. I don't want to skip the women. Patience Shep, the first known female doctor in the history of the world, right here. See her seated. And she's not only the first known doctor, she was the director of female doctors. They had a whole tradition of that. Medical tools like drills, forceps, knives, all this used for surgery. And here's the birthing stool. This is how women actually gave birth. Now, I don't know personally, but this seems to make more sense to me. What do you women think? Gravity makes more sense, does it not? And so this is how they gave birth. They had pregnancy tests. If she would urine on wheat and barley, and then that would determine if a male or female would be born. So they had all kinds of tests, eye repair at work, everywhere you see medicine. But take a look at this. This is the oldest known artificial toe in the history of the world. This one right here, 3,000-year-old wooden artificial toe. Now, is this a left or a right foot?
Right.
It's right, yes. This is the artificial wooden toe. Why did they make it super dark brown? To match the skin tone. This is the actual foot of a woman. This is a black woman from 3,000 years ago, or 100 BC. This is the oldest known prosthetic toe in the history of the world. It's in Cairo, Egypt. There it is. There would be no reason for a dark brown big toe if it wasn't to do what? Match the skin tone. So anyway, dollar bill, we can say quite a lot about it, but I have this in the book. I just want to share with you, we can talk about math. There's so many contributions. That's why I wrote the book, to really make sure that people are not overlooking unique African contributions and giving credit to other people. What typically happens with this is documents are renamed. They're named after whoever bought it, or it's named after the institution that it now resides in, and not named after the Africans that created the science. So I can share with you a lot, but I think a lot of you have heard of the so-called Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. It cannot be named after Pythagoras. He knew nothing about this science until he went to Kemet and studied for 22 years. How do we know? The Greek writer said that the man went and learned a mathematical science in Egypt that he didn't know back home. Where were the geometry teachers in Greece? They didn't exist. What about the books in Greece? They didn't exist. But we certainly know that Pythagoras lived about 500 or so BCE, but guess what? This document is more than 1,000 years older than Pythagoras himself. I call it the Amos papyrus because Amos is the scribe that copied it from an older document. So you talk about the so-called a squared plus b squared equals c squared, the theorem, it's already demonstrated here. It's there more than 1,000 years before Pythagoras' mama knew him. You have the evidence here. So how could it be called the Pythagorean theorem? No, shouldn't be called after him. He didn't have anything to do with inventing this. It should be called after the scribe that copied it from an older document to a newer document. And then what Amos did is simply sign his name that he faithfully copied the document. There's 87 advanced mathematical problems. Each one of the lines, you see it's got red text, it's a different mathematical problems. 87 of them, trigonometry, algebra, geometry, arithmetic, without a single error, and demonstrating the square of the hypotenuse, or a squared plus b squared equals c squared. In California, every 10th grader has to know this, and they're misinformed. So I tell my colleagues, don't misinform students. Remember, the goal is to stop the spread of ignorance. So it should be called the Amos theorem. He's the one that copied it from an older document. Why did he copy it? Well, you know, paper decays over time. They didn't have scanners, they didn't have copiers. Scribes copied by hand. So this, oh, by the way, if you want to see this, this document, it is in the British Museum in London. Check it out. It's on the 2nd floor. And you'll see the Amos theorem to put the rest, the so-called Pythagorean theorem. Can't be called after the man that came around more than 1,000 years after this document was already there. So because of all these contributions, some people have had an issue. When you have an African royal family like this, most people have never seen an original image of King Tutankhamun. You have now. This is mom, this is dad. Some say, well, maybe this is the grandmother and grandfather. I don't think so, because the DNA tests have not been revealed by Zahi Hawass and the Egyptian government. But this is his mother, Queen T, and his father, Amenhotep III. Even if this was grandmother and grandfather, it really doesn't matter because you're looking at an African royal family in the 18th dynasty. And this is an original mannequin of King Tut. If any of you saw the King Tut exhibit in the Young Museum some years ago, that was here, this one. Stunning. Stunning image of King Tutankhamun. And these are all original images of Tutankhamun, but guess what? National Geographic changed his identity. King Tut lost all his melanin and changed racial identity back in 2005. So the only thing I agree with this June 2005 issue of National Geographic, the only thing I agree with is the title, The New Face of King Tut. Then it gave the man a brand new face. How did he go from this to this? Are you kidding me? And this was actually being peddled in the museum, at the LA County Museum of Art, 2005. Then it went to Fort Lauderdale, then it went to Chicago, and then Philadelphia with this image. People protested in all those cities. So let me just end and show you this. If you don't think people are capable of certain things, take a look at this fraud. I have this in my book because this will be one of my upcoming publications, Modern Fraud, Room 32 in the Cairo Museum in Egypt. I call it the forgery room because in Room 32 you have the forged statues of Rahotep and Nafret. They're right in the middle of the museum floor. People are stunned when they see these images. Now Rahotep and Nafret are real historical figures. It's just that the statues of them are modern and fake and phony. So let me share with you this. So in Room 32, people crowd around and like to see these statues. And I mean, what a room. I call it a forgery room because these are fakes. These are forgeries. They're not made by the hands of ancient Africans. They're made by the hands of modern man. These were peddled and presented to the world in 1871. No records, no original photography, no original field notes, nothing. Not only that, how do I know it's a forgery? Again, you all asked a lot of good questions today. I'm just about finished, but check this out here, is that a long list of rules are violated. Rahotep is a real historical figure. He's a son of the king during the Pyramid Age. He is also a general in the army and a high priest. He had the best of the best painters and sculptors at his disposal. So they don't change the artistic rules that they think were perfect because they were given to them by God. But these are very unique. So guess what? You don't have individual seated statues with a headboard like this. Never. We shouldn't say never. Yeah, you should say never if you know. I studied over 1 million artifacts. I challenge someone to show a seated statue of a royal family member with a individual statue with a seat. No, it's a low back, just like you all sit in low back chairs. That's what you see, a low back chair, not high back chairs. That's one rule violated. Another rule, the writing's never by the head. It's like a distraction anyway. It's too cluttered. Where's the writing always? By the feet. What else is the problem? No affection between husband and wife. Show me another example of that. Another rule violated. Not only that, but Nafret has on the wrong outfit. The outfit she has on should be worn by men in a special ceremony. The conspirators didn't know that. She's the only one with this kind of diadem. Completely unique. Plus their skin colors are way too light. You don't see anything like this in the Pyramid Age. Not only that, take a look at the uneven color of Rahotep's legs because the cheap paint did not dry evenly. By the way, notice he has a clenched fist. Africans in classical Kemet don't make clenched fists without something in it. It's always an object of authority. And if you don't see anything in it, it's because it's been taken and stolen or in a museum. But they don't make empty gestures. And you can see nothing was or could have been there. Another rule violated. What's another rule? You don't see a navel. Show me another statue during the Pyramid Age of a royal family member without a navel. By the way, his kilt, the kilt belt should be protruding through the waistline and not on his lap. And if you take a look, he's the only statue in the world with a gray mustache. Nobody else has a gray mustache. The forgers are something else. Only gray mustache image in the world. And there's only 11 with blue-gray eyes. Either they're forgeries or they've been doctored up after discovery. Where's his wig? They didn't know they were supposed to give him one. Then you have a chain here. Unique. Completely a white cord. Are you kidding me? By the way, it's kind of bleached out a little bit in the room, but this is a smudge of gray. And this is supposed to be the best artists at the height of their artistic power. They're perfect in their execution of images, but this, they couldn't dry the paint evenly. And the smudge of gray should be gray and white all the way around. Nobody in the world, experts couldn't identify what the pendant was. And I finally cracked the code after a while. I figured out it was a crude, clumsy, and incompetent heart. But it's so crude you couldn't tell what it is. Even the best experts couldn't figure it, but it's supposed to be a heart. Anyway, I can tell you many more things about this, but maybe this will cap it off. The forgers were rushing when they put this out there and there's paint dripping down the back of his neck. Really? Are you kidding me? You're really gonna, they did it. And in case you need a close-up, there it is. Wow. Totally unique. But that's what happens, you know, lots of forgeries. So, and the same forger, look, the same artists who are this sloppy, we're made to believe that they can paint masterpieces at the same time, at the same location of Maydoun. And you got the Maydoun geese. These are masterpieces. Look at this exquisite detail. How could artists who were so good at what they do across the board, the Maydoun geese, are considered masterpieces, but yet at the same time, the artists from Maydoun they couldn't paint, they couldn't even stop the paint from dripping. Can you imagine? They couldn't even get the paint here to be even. So this is phony. But anyway, but that's part of, I've got a little section of that in the book. I mean, it's very important. So my book will be Modern Fraud, and I argue that these are two of the greatest forgeries in the history of ancient African archaeology. I know time is on the move, so I can share with you quite a lot more. We could always talk about Axum, but we don't have time. We can talk about Great Zimbabwe, but guess what? We don't have time. We can talk about West Africa, but guess what? We don't have time. But we can say quite a lot. So it's a lot that we cover in the book, and I really appreciate the opportunity to share with you some of the contributions. Also great rulers like Mansa Musa, one of the great rulers in Mali. And you know, he was considered to be the richest person in the history of the world. Estimated wealth, $400 billion. 400 billion. This came out in 2012, by the way, this great ruler. We can always talk about all of that. We don't have time. Really, so I'd like to hear from you all. I know the time's on the move, but he comes from an area of great intellectual tradition. This is a manuscript. I don't even know the date. It's one of my students at Contra Costa College. She somehow got a picture of this. It's in her grandfather's collection in Morocco. And she was able to photograph this from old Timbuktu. And they had a whole university tradition. By the way, Mansa Musa took the throne because his brother, Abubakar II, traveled to the west around 1312, 180 years before Columbus. So Africans did not first come as slaves, not at all. They came as independent rulers long before the introduction of slavery. So of course we mentioned that. Of course the Olmec, you can't leave out the Olmec civilization. It's a Native American culture, yes. We agree to that. Its foundation is Native American, going back to at least 1200 before the Common Era in modern day Mexico. But you cannot leave out, we cannot leave out the heads of the rulers. 17 heads of kings. And these are unique images. If any of you saw the Olmec exhibit at the Young Museum, you would have seen the description that the heads don't look like the rank and file people. There's no way that these are the same groups. And I simply showed the catalog to my class. I said, you all make a decision. Are these the same ethnic or racial type, or are they different? So very powerful images that we've been knowing from the 1850s. Not only the front, but take a look at the braids. Africoid hairstyle of this image. So anyway, that's all in the book. We could go on for a while, but I am going to be taking groups this summer. We're going to go to Kemet or Egypt, and then also Ethiopia. So we do have some brochures in the back and with the tours. And so thank you very much. I tried my best to just give you a little bit, but obviously there's a lot more that we can really cover. So I'm Professor Manu Ampim. I want to thank the staff here for the work of getting you to come out in the rain and learn something that you probably didn't know to some degree. I hope we gave you at least one or two or maybe three aha moments. So thank you very much.
Are you going to take questions?
Yes.
That's what I'm saying.
Yes, if any comments, questions? Yes, Mr. Patel. Yes, sir.
I'm struck by the mother of Aspelta, and it made me think of the Queen Mother as a constitutionally important figure in African societies, particularly in West Africa. And so you cannot have a king without a queen mother. And the queen mother may not necessarily be the actual mother of the king, but it might be an elder sister or an aunt. And so can you comment on Aspelta in relation to with the queen mother, the idea of the queen mother and the necessity of the queen mother in African societies?
Yes, sir. I appreciate that. You know, the idea of a queen mother is very important, very significant. Mr. Bomandelli is very correct, is that a lot of times that might say mother, or it may not be a blood relative. And many of us grew up, even here in the Bay Area, calling someone aunt or uncle. I remember when I grew up in the Fillmore District in San Francisco, I later found out that Uncle Choo-Choo was not a blood relative. And Uncle Choo-Choo and Aunt Gladys were called aunt and uncle because that's the role they played. So that's, and you know, and so when we go to Africa, people will say, oh, father. They know I'm not their father, but they are giving me that respect because I might represent the age group that their father may be in, and also the role that I play among them, and that's how they see it today, that's how they've seen it in the past. That's a very important point, because sometimes when the text says mother or father, it may not necessarily mean that. Or wife. Yeah, but the way we think about wife is completely different. This is a political marriage to keep the rulership in the family. But the queen mothers are absolutely essential. And one of the things that is so important even now in places like Sudan, they're excited about the role of the queen mothers in Sudan. So there's the title of the queen mothers, and the rulers were called Kindaki. Kindaki. So a lot of the folks, before they were dispersed and displaced in Sudan last year because of the war, this was a growing trend. And you can see people online even creating websites, not even in Africa, but I've seen websites created in Europe with Kindaki as a part of their URL or their address, because that's the title for queenship, is Kindaki. We can translate it as queen, and there's a whole line of Kindaki rulers in Kush, hundreds of years. And so we see it in East Africa. We see the role of the queen mothers and women in West Africa as well. So they're the ones that control the throne. So why are there so many kings? Well, we don't want to get it twisted. The king may be the symbol of authority, but the source of the authority is the women. And that's what's very important. But it's one of the great traditions. And I think we don't know as much about it because if you look at this old tradition of the Kindaki queens in Kush, or the high status in Kemet or Egypt, then it's a great contrast between that high-level political influence and what you might see in Greek and Roman culture, where in Greek culture, women were not even considered citizens. The only people that were considered citizens in Greek were men that had a certain amount of wealth and influence. But in Greek, 80 to 90% of the people in Greek culture had they weren't even considered citizens. Women were not citizens, the poor were not citizens, enslaved people were not citizens, foreigners were not citizens. But all women, they were non-citizens. So this is why you don't have female rulers in Greek culture and society, because they weren't looked at that way. Totally different in Africa. And so when we point that out, the evidence is very, very clear. And so people try to ignore evidence. You can't ignore the evidence. You see women in high political roles. You see women writing letters, receiving letters. Well, if you say they couldn't write, why would someone be writing a letter to the woman? Well, maybe somebody read it for her, really? What about, why are they writing letters? Well, maybe she dictated and someone wrote it for her. What about the female ruler, Seshet, who's the deity, the female deity of writing? Well, that could just be symbolic. But what about the woman who calls herself a female scribe? Well, that's just one example. We need more. We don't need more. But what about all these images where they have the profession, they have it under the chair? You can see it in the relief. Whatever the profession is, you see it underneath the chair. Well, that could just be convention because the artist didn't have enough space. Really? this is intellectual gymnastics. It's like performing somersaults to get to an illogical conclusion that's not matching the evidence. But that's one of the most important things that we should know about the significant and high status of women in antiquity coming from Africa. So that's why it's something very different between Western feminism and African womanism. Completely different. Women and men have different roles. But the women are not fighting to get status or justice. No, we know that because of the internal records, and we also know that because of what foreigners wrote. Like Herodotus, he writes about the high status of women. He's writing about things that are new to him. Women willing and dealing in the marketplace. The women are the ones owning property in the family, and so forth. And we see all these, like Taharqa, the greatest builder in the history of Kush. Do you know that Taharqa, he had to send for his mother all the way from Sudan. She had to go all the way down north into the northern part of Egypt so he can receive his coronation. It took a while for Mom to come to be in charge. So that's one of the most important things that we can look at, and that is the high and important political and economic and social status of women in the Queen Mother. So that's an excellent point to bring up.
Thank you.
Yes. Anybody else comments, questions? Well, yes.
Okay, can you comment on the issue of color among academics studying these ancient classical civilizations? And when I say color, I'm talking about phenotype. Black skin, wide noses, that.
Okay, I appreciate it. So the question is, if I can comment about color. This is in antiquity, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, yes.
And how scholars, why is there such confusion among the scholarly community?
Okay, yes, I appreciate it. Okay, so the issue is that as we look at, let me see if I can bring a map up here.
And you mentioned Hawass as well, so if you can comment on Hawass in the context of all of this.
Okay, so yes, so let me go to a map here and to answer that. So what we have here in the northeast part of Africa, in the Nile Valley, the lower Nile Valley, because of the extraordinary development, there's people who had claimed that Africa had no part of the world. And you had some of the great philosophers, the great historians like Arnold Toynbee, who said he said there were 21 major civilizations since the beginning of human society. This is Arnold Toynbee, the great British historian. 21 major civilizations, 5 satellite civilizations. Arnold Toynbee said out of the 26 civilizations, the only primary group that didn't contribute to any one of them was the black race. And so then so people like that, let me just get to a map. So people like that have really misled the public by far. And so this area here, because of the extraordinary development in Egypt, for example, what has happened, and I point out to my students that the way people take these contributions from Africans is avoid the timeline. They avoid the chronology. So that's why I don't allow people to talk about back in the day. Whose day? What day? We got to put it in a proper chronological perspective. So you have thousands of years of African development, and then you have the foreign period, the Greeks, the Romans, and others that came thousands of years after the fact. So this area of Africa, because of the extraordinary development with pyramids and all kinds of other extraordinary developments, the Egyptologists and writers, historians have said that the people that had created Egypt, they called them the Mediterranean type. That was a code word for European descent. Some said they were black-skinned whites. Others said they were Western Asiatics. Some went to Mars to look for aliens, but everybody was responsible for the development of Kemet other than Africans in the region. So it had been assumed that they were white, because scholars have been quoting each other. Not the evidence, but quoting each other about whiteness until this was finally blown up in 1974 when at the Cairo Symposium, one of the greatest scholarly debates that we've ever seen, UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, organized a world debate. And what was very clear in the debate, that these people in ancient Kemet or Egypt were clearly Africoid from the very beginning. And so then people began to back away from making the direct arguments of white-skinned people creating Egypt, and then they just started showing white-skinned images from the old, from the late period, the foreign period, the period after Kemet had already become old. So rather than making scholarly arguments, now they were just showing images from the Greek period, the Roman period, and avoiding the timeline, and never really pointing out, wait a minute, these came thousands of years later. What about the early period, the Pyramid Age, when they were building for eternity? So all those images were suppressed, and they still are to a very large degree. That's why, as informed as you all are, you probably never saw Hessie Ray before. Why is that? It's on purpose, it's by design. So in terms of the skin color has been a very big issue, because if it is admitted that in this area Africans developed a high-level civilization that was completely influential and influenced Greek and Roman culture, which they agreed to and admitted. So the Greeks never claimed that they were the inventors of geometry or math or anything like that. It was in the late 1700s and early 1800s in the University of Göttingen in Germany. These are a bunch of scholars in Germany that rewrote the history of the world, and they gave credit to Greeks where there was no credit. These are the propaganda scholars that turned history upside down. They took the ancient model that no one disputed, not even the Greeks, and replaced it with the modern Aryan model. And then all of a sudden, everybody and everything turned white. And this was documented first by Martin Bernal in his book Black Athena in the mid-'80s. But you can see it. You can see how this was done. So the skin color has been a really big issue, because people are not willing to admit that Africans were the ones that were at the root and foundation of many of the contributions that we hold so dearly. As a matter of fact, George Reisner is one who was struck by color. George Reisner is one of the pioneers who did field work in Egypt and Sudan, 1907 to 1932. For a quarter century, George Reisner, representing the Boston Museum of Fine Arts and Harvard. At the further Reisner went south, he was more and more disturbed. He was looking for a white queen and couldn't find one, so that upset him. I don't know why he would be going to this area looking for a white queen, so he came up short. And the further south that George Reisner went, he literally saw black-skinned people and said there's no way that they are capable of creating this kind of culture. So it was George Reisner who was struck by color. His views were warped views. And Egyptologists, and people in nubiology, they admit that George Reisner had warped racial ideas, but yet they still use his ideas. How could you criticize the man's ideas, admit that these are racist, they're anti-black? He says that black-skinned people could not and did not create or contribute anything. And so it was Reisner who misrepresented the history. It's Reisner who, when he saw Kush, he would translate it into Nubia, because it's too difficult to admit for him that these were Kushites. That means that, so guess what has now happened to really tie this great question up, is that when it's unmistakable that Africans from the South went down north and united the entire region under one rulership, under the Kushites, guess what? Then all of a sudden a brand new description came up. Oh, well, these are the black pharaohs. Black pharaohs, but why are you calling them black pharaohs? We don't call them the white rulers of Rome or the white emperors of Rome or Greece, but all of a sudden a brand new description, the black pharaohs of the 25th dynasty. Oh yeah, we won. No, you didn't win, because when that came out universally in 2008, that was to mislead the public to think that the only time and the first time that there were literally black rulers was the 25th dynasty of Egypt, when they came from the south from Kush in United Kush in Egypt to suggest very clearly that the first 24 dynasties had no black pharaohs. That's why they start focusing on the 25th dynasty as the first and exclusive dynasty with black rulers. So those people from Kush with the jet black skin, and so that's called the 25th dynasty, and that's the group called the black rulers or the black pharaohs. And but so it's brand new terminology in order to suggest that there were no black people before you see these images from Kush. So the color scheme has been very calculated. And then when it doesn't make sense to call them black pharaohs, guess another term came up. Well, when we see Egypt and the Kushites, they're kind of mixed in the same area of Kerma. Well, that's cultural entanglement. What do you mean cultural entanglement? Entanglement is always negative. It has a negative connotation. So whether the same cultural overlap, culture intermixture, culture exchange back and forth, they're in the same Nile Valley, the same ecosystem, the same people with overlapping cultural traditions in terms of their headdress, their names. When they use the name Amen, you may say Amen, it comes from ancient Kush, but you also see it in Egypt as well, like Tut Amen. The name is there, it means hidden or unseen. There's so much overlap between the entire region. It's not cultural entanglement. It is a cultural exchange that is quite obvious. So they've come up with this because it's upsetting that there's no way to separate Kush and Kemet because they're linked in one region with one cultural complex. There's so much overlap, how do you even tell? It's hard. You look at the pottery, it seems the same. You look at the monuments, they seem the same. So that's what's been happening. It's been a color angle. It definitely goes back to George Reisner and before Reisner. But Reisner has had the most influence because he put together a timeline for Kush that makes no sense because it's not the timeline in Kush. It's Kush, and then a little bit of Nubia, and then Kush. It's crazy. It's chaos. So how could somebody be legitimate as a scholar and claim that George Reisner had warped racial beliefs and to state that openly, and then not see that the ideas about Kush and Nubia have nothing to do with facts? That's why, when I showed you the image where they mixed up and called these people Nubians, is because the further you go south, you're looking at Kushites. Nubia is a little bit more palatable only because the Nubians are in southern Egypt and northern Sudan. They're in the northern part. Kush is further south, so then it could be no influence from anybody, if you see the point I'm making. But at least they can try to claim, well, maybe the Nubians were influenced by some interplanetary travelers or maybe some Western Asiatics, but when it comes to Kush, we can't make such claim because they're too far to the south. So anyway, it's a lot to say about it, but this is, the mislabeling of Kush is fundamentally a result of a racial agenda. And you go back to George Reisner, there's not a single mainstream scholar that would say, privately, if they're honest, or publicly, that George Reisner was not color-struck and had a racial bias against the African rulers. They admit that, but then use his time frame. His time frame is based on warped racial beliefs that he's not going to give credit to Taharqa and others. That's why you can see these statues and you'll have people identifying these as Nubians. Nowhere does it say, well, Nubia and Kush must be the same or something like that. They just don't want to give credit. And I can just tell you, that's why people in South Sudan were very much supportive of my work, because they had not met anybody that had come to their area that wasn't representing some agenda that they disagreed with. And so these are not Nubians, these are Kushites, and the color is very, very problematic for those that wish they weren't that dark. Yes.
Please, can you comment on Hawass?
Oh, yes, sorry.
You mentioned him earlier.
Yes, Zahi Hawass. Everybody knows the Indiana Jones guy. Zahi Hawass, he was the head of the Supreme Council of Antiquities in Egypt. And Hawass is the one that you would see on the History Channel, National Geographic all the time. Wherever there's a excavation, Hawass is there. Whenever there's a discovery, Hawass is there. Not that he's excavating, but he made all archaeologists stand still, don't go to the press until I come in. I will make the announcement of what you discovered. And Hawass would always misrepresent what was found. Yes, we think that this might be a tomb for King Tut, his mother. It's always somebody famous. So this might be Imhotep's tomb. Or it's always some famous person to do what? Draw in more money, draw in more interest. Even when the excavators don't make such claims because there's no evidence for it. Hawass even said that they found some new tombs in the Valley of the Kings. And they're not tombs. It was a storage area where they kept supplies. And he said this was King Tut's, probably his wife and his mother. No such thing. So anyway, Hawass is the one who's done a lot of misrepresentation. He said Africans had nothing to do with Egypt. And then when you say, well, what race were the ancient Egyptians? Well, they weren't any race. They were just Egyptians. Really? How does that make sense? So Hawass is somebody that really has a problem with the evidence. So he's the one that you've seen on all of the channels. And by the way, Hawass was run out of his office with the Arab Spring in 2011 or the revolution in Egypt. The archaeology students and Egyptology students marched to his office in Cairo and said, you know what? You sold us a bill of goods. We spent all this time with our degrees. We don't even have a job. So they marched him down and ran Hawass out. And plus Hawass was criticized because when thieves broke into the Cairo Museum, they stole important artifacts. They stole 70 artifacts. Zahir Hawass told the press, told the public that nothing had been stolen and the Cairo Museum was safe. And that gave the thieves time to get away. And they recovered some of those artifacts in 2011, but the ones they covered were busted up and broken. Because Hawass, so people had issues with Hawass. And by the way, I know one archaeologist who was part of the Supreme Council of Antiquities. He had challenged Hawass's his determination of certain artifacts, which he was not even the excavator. He's coming in making announcements about certain sites. So one of the archaeologists, there's a PhD in determining human remains and so forth. He challenged Hawass, and guess what? That was the end of his career. And I met with him, and when I saw his website, he told me that Hawass had kicked him off of the Supreme Council of Antiquities. And Hawass is also, he has ended, or as they say these days, he canceled the permit. He actually canceled the permit of different archaeologists just because they had the nerve to have an independent opinion. Like Joanne Fletcher, for example, that gave a interview to, I think it was the Discovery Channel at the time, and Hawass was in the documentary, but he didn't want her to make a conclusion that these human remains could be Nefertiti. He didn't make the announcement, so guess what? He told her that that's it. He took her permit, and that's to end her career. But Hawass has been very problematic for people because he seems to make up things, and he's also made a lot of determined. And by the way, let me just say one other thing about Hawass, is that archaeologists have problems with him because you have to tiptoe around him or lose your permit. And by the way, Hawass, one of the things about Zahir Hawass that's been very problematic is that if the evidence does not support his position, then the evidence is suppressed. I'll give you one example, and then I kind of put this in some final context. In 2010, there were DNA tests of all of the royal so-called mummies in the Cairo Museum. They all went through extensive DNA tests. And guess what? So the mummies, they're really African ancestors. The mummy is really disrespectful. They call an ancestor a mummy. You know, so it's disrespectful. But they made a special room of these royal remains. I always tell my groups, I wouldn't go in there if I was you. Number one, why give them money to misrepresent your ancestors? Plus, you're not going to feel so good when you see how they're treated. People come on, yeah, Professor, I told you not to go in there, but because of interest, you saw other tourists go in there and you went. So they didn't really have labels. You know why? Because it's not clear who's who. The one who's supposed to be somebody's father, guess what? Impossible. They're the same age. So they just hide this. So the DNA test helped clarify some of the things, of who was related to who and who was not related to who. What did Hawass order? I'm glad you asked. He ordered that the DNA sequences not be made public. Why? Because it would show that they don't know what they're talking about. That these identifications make no sense. But guess what happened finally? So in 2021, there was a golden parade in Egypt, in Cairo. They decided that to take 22 royal African ancestors from the Cairo Museum, and they had a golden international parade to parade them through the streets of Cairo to highlight the opening of the brand new exhibit, the National Museum of Egyptian Antiquities. It's a brand new museum. To highlight this museum, they took human remains and paraded them through the streets of Cairo. How disrespectful. They could have taken artifacts and done that. They could have just had a parade in front of the new museum. And then so I go to the new museum to check it out, and now all of the royal ancestors put in a new museum of Egyptian civilization. Now they have them all labeled. But you never produced any DNA results to identify them in the first place. So now a person not knowing the background will think that, oh, well, this is it. No. These are labels that have been put on just for display. They've never been identified because Zahir Hawass ordered that this is the kind of control he had. He made sure that if National Geographic wanted to print anything, National Geographic wanted a exclusive interview, you pay. You want an exclusive interview, you give us equipment to do the CT scans of these remains. And guess what? You see photographs of some of the technicians, the scientists doing the CT scan. What do they have on? Masks and gloves. What did Hawass have on? No mask, no gloves at all. And his hands are right there near the royal ancestors. I mean, just disrespectful. But this is the man that you see, the Indiana Jones man. He was run out of his office, but he's making a comeback. The last couple of years, you'll see him on these specials. You'll see him with the different exhibits now. And when you finish an exhibit on King Tut or some other exhibit, and when you leave, it's always the same. You leave the exhibit, and it goes right to, and you've probably seen this, the gift shop. And in the gift shop, right front and center, is the catalog for the exhibit, and you see the name Hawass. So I know he's making a comeback, and it's all about money and influence with him. And people have issues with him, but they don't always say because it may jeopardize their concession. So if you have an archaeological concession, you need a permit to go and work that concession. And this is the kind of man that can take a permit and has taken permits away from people. So Hawass is going on record to say that black people had nothing to do with Egypt. And so that's why it's very problematic. He says things that make no sense whatsoever. But anyway, that's Hawass, and so we really have to be very careful when we're listening to somebody like that who's very political. And by the way, at his age, how can this man be up and down the country at his age? If you're hearing him, as I did in San Francisco at the Civic Center before COVID, this man said he's giving all these archaeological digs as if he's the one doing all the work. Nobody can do that at any age, but definitely not at his age. Hawass. Anyway, I've written about Hawass and all of the different problems that his conclusion represents. So anyway, I appreciate it. So I think there's nothing else. Thank you, Mr. Martinelli. I think that's pretty much about it. I appreciate your time, and so I'm Professor Manu Ampim, and I do have some books and other materials that are here. So I want to thank the library staff for the work of organizing this talk, and so thank you very much.